Welcome back to Reclaim Your Life with Katish on YouTube, Facebook and the internet. Today I have a wonderful guest with me who is a naturopath, Georgina. And Georgina is going to talk to us today about the role of naturopathy in perimenopause and menopause. And because I don't know a lot about the subject, she's going to guide us and tell us a little bit about her profession and her interest in perimenopause and menopause, and how she feels that naturopathy can actually help women with some of the symptoms that they may be feeling, and also with their general health and vitality. So Georgina, welcome.
Hi Katish, thank you for having me today.
Thank you for coming on. Now, I'm going to ask an obvious question to you, but I know that you were telling me somebody else asked you this question yesterday. That question is, what is naturopathy?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I thought, fitting this week, it's Natural Medicine Week, so it's good to give people a bit of an overview of the different therapists out there. But the naturopathy is really founded upon nature cure. So it's the idea that nature can heal most things, and that everybody has within them this innate healing potential. So it's just about tapping into the body's natural systems and resources and enhancing them to bring about healing potential. So we work a lot with things like food as medicine, so diet and lifestyle changes. We integrate nutrition and herbal medicine.
Mm-hmm.
They're really the basic foundations, I guess, for how we would treat a condition or help to support somebody with general health and wellness. And then I guess every naturopath is a little bit different in terms of some of the other bits and pieces that they might use to support people. So for me, as an example, I love to also work with flower essences.
Okay, I love
They're a really beautiful way to support people with their emotional well-being, and with Australia's native plants in particular, I love how powerful they can be. They're so old and so powerful in their own way, and very specific in terms of which emotions they support. So I usually use a combination of those things to treat people. Yeah.
And is the flower essences a separate kind of training than you did to naturopathy, or was that incorporated in your training?
It was sort of like an elective option for us. Yeah. Yeah.
And tell me, how did you choose naturopathy in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it actually, I guess it all started for me when I was a teenager, or maybe I was actually I might have been almost in my early 20s, and I was very run down. My immune system was quite weak, and I came down with a really bad viral infection.
Okay.
And my mum was quite worried about me, and she actually took me to see a naturopath back then. So that was my first experience of naturopathy, and I got better thanks to that naturopath support at the time. And then I embarked on, a totally different career path actually, and it was event and conference management, and I did that for 20 years, and it was high-paced, full-on, extremely stressful, unforgiving deadlines, working late every night, working every weekend, and just going through the motion all the time, just rolling out the same things, and just always thinking there's got to be something more that I'm capable of and able to give to people. And I think after 20 years of doing the same thing, I just wanted a change. And I was really struck. One day I was in a convention centre, and there were all of these scientists standing around, like they were actually geology based, and they were just so passionate about their topic and what they were learning about and sharing with one another. And I just thought, I think I need to go back and study again. So for me, I really wanted to either help animals or people. So I was actually tossing up zoology as an option.
Okay.
and naturopathy for helping people, and naturopathy won me over, because I guess I could relate to, you know, having gone through a process of needing support and then being extremely well supported through the process. So it had helped me personally. So that.
Tell me your interest in perimenopause and menopause and women's health. How has that come about?
Yeah, so I guess it's a bit of a natural evolution. So I've been treating men and women, all different conditions for sort of 8 years now. And I've always really loved treating hormonal conditions, and it just seems to be the way that more women than men reach out for support. So the natural evolution is that I've really honed in on a lot of female hormonal conditions. And I've had some really great results with menopausal women and perimenopausal women. So I'm at the point now where I really just want to support those women in particular. I really want to kind of focus in on that topic because it's such a meaty topic. There's so much to learn and to contribute, and so many different ways to support people through that whole transition. And I guess what I love is that everyone's experience is different. So, you know, I'm really passionate, I guess, about tailoring medicine to suit the individual and recognising that no one person is the same as the person next to them. So for me, I guess this is where I feel a little bit creative. Sometimes I can come up with tailored dietary protocols or mixing up some liquid herbs for somebody, for example, to really suit specifically what's going on with them. And I think probably also coming from more of a corporate background originally, I know the kind of demands that are placed on women, and when they're trying to hold it all together, you know, many of them are juggling families, taking care of their elderly parents, they're trying to do domestics, they're trying to have a career, like a meaningful career, and achieve a lot with their careers. And there's just so much going on that they kind of put themselves last. So I think that there's a real need to support women so that they can do all of those things that they want to be doing, because ultimately if they're not taking care of themselves, then everything else is just going to fall apart around them. So
absolutely. And some of your clients who have come to you with hormone related issues, without obviously divulging who they are, what sort of issues do you get presented to you?
With menopausal conditions in particular?
Yeah, menopausal and perimenopausal. Yeah, what sort of complaints do you get people coming to seek help for?
Yeah, so I guess the predominant symptoms that bring a lot of people in to me are the hot flushes and the night sweats, because they're really debilitating. And, you know, for a woman who's not working from home but going into a workplace and trying to deal with challenging people and challenging situations or hold meetings and presentations and things like that, the hot flushes can have a profound impact on their ability to feel confident and all those things. So I think for a lot of women, that's the thing that is probably that their number one priority in most cases. But then there's also a lot of mood stuff as well. So it's the irritability, the frustration. They find themselves kind of running with a bit of a short temper, and it's quite unusual for them. They've previously been very level-headed, calm people. So I would say those two things, the hot flushes and the mood swings.
Okay, fantastic. Now, one of the things that we were talking about was the characteristic sign of perimenopause in comparison to menopause. Obviously, menopause, you haven't had a period for over 12 months. But the first thing that changes hormonally is your often an estrogen over amount of estrogen is over dominant in comparison to progesterone. So you're over dominant in your estrogen. Whereas in menopause, you've got more of the progesterone and less of the estrogen by then, and then the testosterone falls away. So a lot of women find that the main estrogen dominant symptoms are the ones that are the problematic ones, which are the ones which are the main indicators of perimenopause. So I was wondering if you could talk us through estrogen dominance and a little bit about what that is and how you see it presented. And I guess some of the ways that you have been able to help women with estrogen dominance.
Yeah, great. I love this topic because it's a nice big meaty topic. I could talk for hours about estrogen. So I guess when we talk about, from a naturopathic perspective, when we're talking about estrogen dominance, sometimes it's as you say, it's in relation to the progesterone level. So estrogen and progesterone, we always look at where they're sitting in relation to one another. So it can be a relative estrogen dominance that's happening in the body. And I guess it can present in different ways again. So for some women, it's very heavy bleeding, very heavy menstrual bleeding, that sensation of flooding. For a lot of women, it can present in lumpy bumps and lumps, like lumpy breasts, for example, so cysts in their breasts. It can present as growths in the uterus as well, or other parts of the reproductive system, so fibroids, for example. And for a lot of women, it can also contribute towards the weight gain because, estrogen is being produced in the other organs and tissues of the body once the ovaries stop producing effectively, and that includes our fat tissues. So, so I guess what I come across quite a lot is I do come across, changes in menstrual bleeds quite a bit, but also women who perhaps have had this history of fibroids and abnormal bleeding, and perhaps that's the pattern that's actually been going on for many, many years before they even reach this perimenopausal period of their life, but they probably didn't acknowledge it at the time or recognise it because it's only become perhaps a bit more problematic during the perimenopausal stage.
Yep.
Yeah.
And is there a link between stress and estrogen? In terms of so for example, during times of high stress emotionally, some women do tend to have heavier bleeds. It's like a stress reaction. And I was just wondering, is that linked to, does estrogen and stress have a direct link in terms of increase in stress leading to increase in estrogen dominance?
So the adrenals are really interesting because they actually pick up most of the load of, they pick up most of the load of estrogen production when our ovaries stop producing that hormone. So, a lot of the pressure falls on the adrenals. So they're, in addition to helping us deal with stress and producing all of the classic stress hormones like adrenaline, noradrenaline and cortisol and things like that, they are, they're also focusing then on the reproductive hormones. So they produce DHEA, and that can convert to the different sex hormones, including estrogen. So there is a link between, our level of stress and how well we're managing our stress and the impacts that can be having on our hormones, definitely.
Okay, yeah. If you could talk me through then the bleeding, the flooding, and I mean, personally not ever experienced fibroids, but I have experienced flooding periods within perimenopause. And when you go and you Google that, for most of the advice is to try and not be stressed, which is
easier said than done.
Yeah, easier said than done when you're, having bathroom visits once an hour and you're feeling awful and tired and drained. And there's just a lot of confusing information about what to drink, what to do. So what are some of your tips of, firstly, to deal with obviously the tiredness that you get from losing so much blood? And then secondly, once you've got through that bleed and that bleed is finished, what are the sort of the actions that you need to take in order to get that back in balance? Or do you think that it's just a cyclical thing that it will then naturally come back in balance? What are your sort of thoughts on that?
So I love to approach it very holistically. So when I look at any perimenopausal symptoms, including the flooding, I'm looking at how do we reestablish balance within the body, and not just hormonally speaking, but bigger picture stuff. So what's happening with the nervous system? Is that person going through an extremely stressful time, and they're constantly in that fight or flight mode where the sympathetic nervous system's in overdrive. If so, that's putting more pressure on the adrenals, and then the adrenals are absorbing, like whipping through a lot of nutrients to enable us, that person to deal with stress, and then can be taking away from the reproductive hormones. So what I look at, I guess, is I'm looking at supporting somebody with their nervous system, their adrenals, also their liver. So the liver plays a really important role in regulating hormones of any kind. Looking at the gut, what's going on with their digestion and everything as well. And then also looking at the environment, so looking at what chemicals and irritants they're encountering through their environment that, again, can have a really profound impact on hormones. So I know it's a sort of a long-winded answer to your question, but I actually look at all of those areas ideally when I'm treating someone. So I do believe that when you are working on supporting all of those areas, that you can kind of regulate the system. So you'll get to a point where the menstrual bleed should settle down again. So it doesn't have to be this perpetual cyclical thing that's quite debilitating and extremely tiring, and all of those things. So to give you some examples, I guess I would be working with a woman to kind of, I've got like a little questionnaire that I give people that allows them to go through their environment, their home environment, their working environment, and whatever other environments they're sort of spending time in, to kind of look at where they can perhaps make changes to reduce the number of chemicals that they're coming into contact with. So that's part of reducing the burden on the liver, for example. So the less toxicity that we're encountering through our environment, the easier our liver can go about its business, which is really to detoxify. And part of that includes detoxifying estrogen, for example. So so there's that aspect. It's making sure that the gut, that the flora in the gut are nice and healthy, that they're producing hormones and the different regulators that they need to be producing as well. So I guess a big part of diet is looking at specifically what foods can regulate estrogen levels relative to progesterone, for example. So phytoestrogens are a great component of diet that have the ability to really either increase estrogen levels or decrease estrogen levels exactly as the body needs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So phytoestrogens, for example, they work at a receptor binding level in the body. So they can enhance estrogen binding, or they can block receptors to minimise estrogen binding. So in a condition where, for example, estrogen is dominant in the body and it's wreaking havoc with heavy bleeding and the lumpy breasts and things like that, it will help to minimise estrogen's binding at that receptor level. So it will help to downgrade estrogen binding and the overall estrogen level in the body. Whereas the opposite is also true. So, for example, a woman who's reached like towards the end of that perimenopausal period, where her periods have basically almost stopped, and there's the hot flushes and things like that are kicking in. That's usually because there's a decline in estrogen in the body, and so phytoestrogens can then work at the receptor binding level to enhance estrogen's capacity to bind. So thereby increasing the estrogen level. So they're really very almost intuitive in terms of working with what the body needs at that particular point in time. That's why I love them, because they're like a true regulating food, Often what we see, I guess, with modern medicine is there can be like medicines out there that are very specific. They hone in on one thing and they just work on that one thing, and they kind of forget about all of those natural systems that we have in place that are the checks and balances that can help restore the balance. So that's why I'm a fan of phytoestrogens and food as medicine generally, because I think that plants, they have a combination of all of these nutrients and components going on that work synergistically to support us in a really balanced way.
One of the questions that I have about natural sources of phytoestrogen is exactly how much do you need to incorporate in your diet? I mean, somebody could say, right, this is an example of a phytoestrogen, but how do you actually know how much you need to incorporate in your diet to actually effectively be getting that instead of taking a supplement, say, for example? So if you could give us some examples of some food sources which are phytoestrogens, and then explain how we understand exactly how much we need to incorporate in our diet for it actually to be getting enough, rather than overdosing one day on a particular vegetable and thinking that we've got enough, but we haven't actually spread it out throughout the month. Like, how do you actually talk that through people when they're trying to understand their meal planning and their food shopping? It seems to me a little bit...
It can be a bit vague, or feel a bit vague, maybe.
Oh, well, I've grown up with a fabulous cook of a mother, but I have not enjoyed it myself. So I find more than other people that I wing it a lot with the way that I cook.
Yeah.
And if you said to me, the easiest way for you to get phytoestrogens in your diet is naturally, I'd be great. Give me a list of things, but it's I need to know exactly, right? You need to tell me exactly how much
sure.
each of these, so that otherwise I'll it'll get lost.
Yeah, of course. So I guess the thing is, different foods have different levels of phytoestrogens in them, and there are different forms of phytoestrogens as well. So some of the highest food sources of phytoestrogens are things like linseeds or flax seeds. Like I can actually, if you were interested, I could share in the group maybe sort of a list of some of the different food sources of phytoestrogens with the levels of
that'd be great.
Would that be helpful?
Yeah, if you could send me a copy of that too, because I always put a blog that goes with these videos, and then under the YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
So it'd be good so that people can then see that and then be able to click back over to your website.
Yeah. So when I send through that list, it will kind of become apparent to people that, I mean, linseeds by far outweigh all of the other foods in terms of phytoestrogen level. Okay. So you only need a very small amount of linseeds or flax seeds for it to get a healthy dose. Okay. So I normally say to my clients the equivalent of 1 tablespoon of flax seeds every day, or if they're using it in a ground form like flaxseed meal or LSA, for example, that's got the linseed, sunflower seeds and almonds, then in that case to use 2 tablespoons of the ground form. Okay. So just integrate that daily. As in breakfast is a good way to integrate something like that. And then later in the day, they could top up their phytoestrogen level again if they want to with a different food source, something like, I know soy is a very contentious food. There's a lot of conflicting evidence out there about the pros and cons with soy, but I personally think a little bit of soy, like soy-based lecithin granules, for example, can be helpful to integrate as well. And again, I would say 2 tablespoons at a time of the soy lecithin granules. I'm not sure if you've worked with those, if you're familiar with them. No. They're really good. Again, you can kind of sprinkle them over cereal or add them to like a smoothie if you're doing a breakfast smoothie, or they're also actually quite yummy just sprinkled on fresh fruit slices as a snack. So it just gives it more of an earthy kind of quality. So something like that, or later in the day you could integrate some chickpeas or some tahini or some sesame seeds. So they're ways of just topping up. With the, I eat predominantly a plant-based diet, so I guess I naturally get quite a lot of the phytoestrogens in my diet, but I'm happy to perhaps, when I send through this list to you, I might give some more specific examples of, how much of those foods to eat. But even if you did nothing else, I would say linseeds, get some linseeds into you.
Okay. And I'm quite interested in hearing a little bit more about, have you used the Australian floral essences at all with the perimenopausal symptoms? I know that's got nothing to do with estrogen dominance, but I was just flashed across, then I wanted to ask you about any of the particular Australian flowers helpful. Do they have any of the properties that are useful for relieving any menstrual discomfort or anything like that? Or how do you usually use those? Are they more on the emotional side? Are they good for calming anger or?
Definitely, yeah. So some essences are very good for calming anger. So things like Jagger is a good one for anger and resentment, for maybe women who are holding on to a bit of bitterness and want to overcome that. Things like counteracting the anxiety sometimes that can come up during perimenopause. So something like Crowea is a good one for people who are continual worry warts, like worry about everything. Some nice sort of calming, like a flower essence, I guess, that helps to bring a bit more joy if someone's feeling a bit depressed and a bit sad and everything. So Sunshine Wattle is a lovely one for renewing a little bit of joy and zest, and Banksias as well. So Swamp Banksia and Old Man Banksia, very good for if you're feeling a little bit fatigued, a little bit weary, and kind of almost like a little bit apathetic, like you've kind of stopped caring about things a little bit, can really help to bring you back up, feeling a bit more energetic and a bit more zesty, you know?
Sure.
So I can go about it a couple of ways. So you can actually get some pre-made blends of flower essences. And so with the Australian Bush Flower Essences range, for example, they do have a woman essence, and they've got specific essences for women. So I think there's a sensuality essence and there's a woman essence. And so they integrate a pre-existing mix of essences, including some of the ones like she oak, for example, which is all around female balance. And things like spinifex as well can also reintegrate a bit more masculine energy for a woman. So, yeah. So there are those pre-made essences, or what I like to do is tailor-make a blend for people. So I do have some essences in my dispensary. Sometimes I get them made up. They're based in New South Wales, so sometimes I get them made up in New South Wales and then sent to my clients.
Okay.
So it's really, when I'm working on the emotional aspect for women, it's about, I guess, identifying what are some of the key emotions that are coming up at that point in time. And I'm looking for perhaps some synergy or patterns that are developing with the emotions as well. So when I'm putting together a specific blend of essences, I'm looking to get a mix of essences that are working along one sort of main theme. To have the most benefit, you actually need to kind of see, like, draw those links and create a bit of a focus for that blend. And they can, once the woman has received those essences, what she would normally do is put 7 drops under her tongue first thing in the morning, and then again last thing at night before she goes to bed. And it's about developing that rhythmic frequency with how you take them, because your body is most receptive to energetic shifts at those times. It's first thing in the morning when the day is still, before any of the other interruptions and things come into play, and then last thing at night. So some women, for example, might only need to take the flower essences for a 2-week period, and then they might experience some profound shifts. For other people, sometimes it can take a little bit longer, but the secret is really just finding the right essence. Sometimes it can be like a single essence that's the perfect fit for a woman. Sometimes it's about finding just a small group of essences that are working synergistically to hone in on that one sort of aspect that's considered the highest priority at that time.
Okay. And for the viewers who are actually overseas, because we get some people who watch this from the USA and the UK, we've been talking there about Australian natural floral essences. in each country, if they visit their own naturopath, are there specific floral essences that, I assume that, I'm going to make a blanket statement here, and this is a big assumption, but I assume that for Australian women, the Australian floral essences would be very profound for them, because that's part of their native environment, and it's what our whole immune systems and bodily systems are based around, as our own native area. But for women in America or United Kingdom, assume that there would be equivalent flowers that would be native to their areas that a naturopath would be able to create some blends for them. Is that right?
Yeah, spot on. So for example, in Europe, they've got the Bach flower remedies.
Yes, okay.
So the Bach flower remedies, you might have heard of Rescue Remedy, for example.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So they're based on more European plant species.
Okay.
And yeah, there is definitely something to be said for tapping into the flora that is native to where you live, because you tend to resonate more naturally with the plants that surround you, that that you've grown up with. They have so, and particularly I think for women's issues of any kind, the Australian bush flower essences actually kind of really delve into a lot of those issues with a lot more specificity, for example, than some of the Bach flower remedies. That's my understanding, because I've studied both. And for women, I would hands down recommend the Australian plants for supporting them in very specific and unique ways.
Okay, great, interesting.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people have been familiar with the Bach range because they're in the pharmacies, but might not have necessarily spent time examining and understanding the Australian floral species. Oh no, I haven't. So that's just something interesting to ponder. Obviously, because I am quite interested in that area, so I find that quite fascinating. Some more food for thought. Was there anything else that you'd like to bring up, or you think that might be useful? I think we were talking on the phone the other day about teas.
Yeah. Actually, I would like to mention, I guess, a couple more tips just to manage estrogen dominance, or relative estrogen dominance.
Yeah, great.
So just going back to diet for a moment. So I guess, so magnesium is a really good nutrient for modulating and, in other words, regulating hormones, particularly estrogen. And so lots of leafy green plants, really essential. They're like leafy greens are sort of got the highest amount of magnesium in them of any plant. Is the chlorophyll that has the magnesium in it. So so leafy greens, things like sort of whole grains, nuts and seeds, so a real whole foods based diet can give a lot of magnesium. Raw cacao, so if you're having a bit of a sweet craving, integrating some cacao in something like maybe some bliss balls is a good way to like curb those little sweet cravings that you can get. So, and then also foods that support your liver. So foods that support liver detox, which is again about regulating hormones. So the liver can clear excess estrogen. The liver can also really can change the pathways that estrogen can go down within the body. So, we've got different forms of estrogen in our bodies, and for most women, estradiol, or estrogen number 2, let's call it, is the most predominant form for the biggest part of our lives. But as we go into menopause, it becomes a different version of estrogen. And when it's broken down through detox pathways, it can go down 3 different pathways. So there's pathway 2, 4, or 16. Some of those pathways are more harmful than beneficial. So the liver plays a critical role in really shunting the estrogen metabolite conversions down very specific, more beneficial pathways, which is what we want to reduce the likelihood of things like lumps and bumps and growth and things like that. So, so foods, going back to the original question, so great liver foods are things like the brassica family veggies, which are your broccoli, collie, cabbage, kale, Brussels sprouts. I know not everyone's a fan, but hopefully within that plant family there's something that appeals to someone out there. Some other foods that are great are carrot and beetroot, and they're available all year round, so that I love to integrate those.
I wanted to also ask you about with the liver, because you've brought that up quite a few times. Obviously with everyone being in lockdown, it's quite common and profound and noticed in the whole of Australian society, and I'm sure the same around the world, that people have been really increasing their alcohol consumption, possibly even the tea and coffee consumption whilst they're at home, a lot of daytime drinking when people were bored, which has to therefore affect upon your ability for your liver to function.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could also, as well as the teas, address you know, what the reduction in alcohol will do for helping with the liver function, and if that will help with estrogen as well.
Yeah, it's a really good point. So alcohol definitely, puts more burden on the liver, and a lot of reasons why people reach for the alcohol is because they don't have effective stress management strategies in place.
Yeah.
And so when we're adrenally fatigued, when our adrenals are having to work really hard to support us through our stress, we tend to reach for our crutches. So that might be the caffeine to give you a pick-me-up, or it might be the alcohol to help relax you, whatever it might be. So minimising the alcohol is good for reducing the burden on the liver, which helps with estrogen recycling and detoxification, so keeping estrogen in a healthy form in the body and reducing excess estrogen if it is dominant relative to progesterone and other things. But also I find the thyroid is a very interesting hormone gland as well. So the thyroid can have an impact on reproductive hormones. It can have a huge impact on our body temperature, our ability to regulate heat and cold, bone, like calcium metabolism for bone strength and protection and things like that too. Not to mention, it's very dynamic, the thyroid, in terms of what it does. But alcohol actually works against the thyroid's capacity to produce hormones effectively as well.
Okay.
So it actually
all alcohol
of any kind, yeah, it actually works against the thyroid. So you want to, when you're looking at hormones, I'm looking always broadly at not just female reproductive hormones, but the adrenal hormones, thyroid hormones. How's the liver interacting with those and helping to clear them or regulate them? So there's many good reasons to reduce the alcohol. Also, it can lead to more flushing as well. You know, some of the hot flushes and the night sweats and things like that, it can have a bit of an impact on the vasodilation, blood vessels' capacity to open and close. And when they're opening all the time, that's when we're getting the flushing, you know. So it can have an impact on that too.
Lots of food for thought there.
Yeah. I've got lots of strategies around adrenals, how to support resilience to stress, and how to also wean yourself off of some of those crutches, how to embark on a bit of a liver detox. And I actually think for a lot of women, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to kind of throw heaps of supplements or herbs at a liver detox. You can kind of go about it quite naturally through diet, through lifestyle, and that's the way I choose to go about things for the most part. But yeah, I think it's highly beneficial for a lot of women to kind of consider that as a factor in what's going on.
Yeah, sure. Okay, great. And so teas.
Teas, yeah. So teas. So what I love about herbal teas is you can make up your own blends. Once you know sort of what individual herbs are good to support your body on lots of levels, you can make up a blend to suit your own palate. And that's often the key, is trying to find the right mix of herbs that you like the flavour of.
Yep.
So I'm just going to put this out there. I know not all women love licorice root, but licorice root as a tea, have you ever tried it, Katish?
Oh, my mum raves about it.
Yeah. So it's a great adrenal tonic.
Okay.
So it's very good for supporting your stress response and by default then also supporting your reproductive hormones. And it's naturally sweet. So licorice root is a great tea. If you don't mind a sweet flavour, if you actually generally gravitate towards the sweeter tasting teas, it's a good one to have in the mix as a base herb. You don't need to add any sugar to your teas when you're drinking herbal teas, particularly if you've got something like licorice root in there, because it's actually, I think, 10 times sweeter than sugar. So it's actually a very sweet tasting herb. So you only need a little bit in the blend, a tiny, tiny bit of licorice root, because it can be quite overpowering otherwise. So some other teas that I would recommend would be, so something to support liver function. So you want to be supporting the liver, its ability to regulate the hormones. So adding in something maybe like some St. Mary's thistle could be good, or some dandelion root. And roasted dandelion root is a lovely, really earthy tasting herb that kind of has a bit of a bitterness to it. So can be a good one for when you're coming off of coffee, for example. You can kind of use roasted dandelion root as an alternative. So you want to have so something to support your liver in the mix, something to support your adrenal, so something like licorice root. Then if you're suffering, I guess, with if for example you've had heavy bleeds, you're feeling really fatigued, you've lost a lot of iron, something like nettle can be really good to integrate, or withania. So nettle is a great, both withania and nettle actually help your body to absorb iron. They help to build up the blood a lot more. They're sort of they're like a tonic. They help to build you up, you know. So withania, it also goes by the name of ashwagandha. It's an Ayurvedic herb. So withania is a good one also for supporting thyroid function. So it actually supports how the brain communicates with the pituitary gland, which then communicates with the pituitary glands in the brain. So I should say it supports what we call we've got the HPA axis and the HPT axis. So the hypothalamus and the pituitary glands in the brain, they control hormones. And so the pituitary gland can communicate directly with the thyroid or with the ovaries, for example, or the adrenal glands. So withania is a good one that actually works on how the brain is communicating those hormonal glands. It can kind of bring about balance, a sense of balance, and it can support sleep. So withania is a good one, or nettle if you're feeling a bit fatigued and you need to build yourself up. Then now I'm not sure how many health stores would have access to something like Vitex, but Vitex or Chase Tree is a good herb. I think as a naturopath I could certainly source it in a tea form. I'm just not sure how readily available it is for women out there, but Vitex is a very good herb for increasing progesterone levels relative to estrogen, so it can help to restore a bit more balance in that sense. And again, it supports how the brain communicates with the ovaries via the pituitary gland. So it's a good one if you can integrate something like that in the mix as well. And then, you know, I guess it depends on the woman, what's going on for her at that point in time. But there are some great herbs that really help to calm. Like if you're feeling a bit irritable and frustrated and you're flying off the handle a lot, something simple like chamomile or lemon balm can be really nice, relaxing herbs to integrate into the mix, because they can help to bring about more of the rest and relaxation functions in the body, you know, bring you down a notch. So yeah, I hope that helps. It kind of gives you a variety of a few different herbs that could be useful.
Obviously, if a woman is going through a lot of bleeding and she gets to that point where she's like, enough. I want to stop this. There's lots of myths that you see on the internet about different teas that can or may reduce bleeding or stop bleeding. Is it true? Can you actually use a tea to reduce a flow, or is that just an urban myth?
Well, so yeah, that's a good question. So, so herbal teas are never going to be as powerful as something like a liquid herb or a herbal extract that you'd get in a tablet or a capsule.
Yep.
So a lot of people don't know how to use teas properly as well to get them to a therapeutic strength.
Yes.
So when we're using herbal teas, you know, we have got astringent herbs that you can put in the mix. Things like yarrow. I know you've mentioned yarrow before through in your group. So yarrow is an example of an astringent herb. We've got other ones as well that we use in herbal medicine. But that's more like that I kind of see that almost as a bit of a band-aid solution, because it's not really addressing the underlying factors that are contributing to the hormonal imbalance.
Yes.
It can have an impact, but probably a moderate one in the greater scheme of things. Just so people kind of have an understanding with herbal teas, you know, to get it to a therapeutic strength, I would recommend that you use at least 1 to 2 teaspoons of tea leaves or root, depending on the type of herb you're using, per cup of boiling water. So it's got to be quite a good amount of tea for every cup of boiling water. And you need to steep it for up to 10 minutes, or preferably sort of at least 10 minutes to get it to a good strength.
Right.
I don't know how many people do that when they make a cup of tea. So it is important. I would say though, for really heavy bleeding, it's highly possible that the woman would need higher level support. So that's where it's probably a good thing to check in with a practitioner, somebody like a naturopath, for example, to see if they need some more heavy duty support in that area. Just in the interim, until we can establish, like, my key message here is women's hormones will respond to dietary and lifestyle changes, but you have to be consistent with it. You have to be doing these things daily, and you have to be allowing at least sort of 3 months usually to gauge the impact that it's having on your hormones. For whatever reason, the female hormones seem to work in 3 monthly cycles, and every woman's different. You know, one woman might feel really positive benefits after a 3-month period. Another woman might take 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. So everyone's a bit different. But I think if the key thing is to establish some really healthy habits, you know, through diet and lifestyle, and continue on with those long term. But sometimes though, women might need the added support. Just
information there. That's been fabulous. Lots and lots to think about. So possibly some of the people who are viewing this will want to contact you. Do you do over Zoom consultations in this kind of COVID environment, or do you just deal with clients who are actually in your hometown? How does it work for you?
Yeah, sure. So I do both. So I see clients in clinic. I live in South Australia, so I live in the Fleurieu Peninsula, south of Adelaide. Otherwise, I can do Zoom consults, so online video consults with people, which is becoming the new norm now.
Yes. So what we'll do for people who are watching this is when this is posted in YouTube, in the comments below, we'll put Georgina's contact details and Facebook page. And on the blog, I'll put Georgina's contact details as well. So is it easiest for them to contact you via Facebook page, via the messenger facility, or do you prefer via an email or mobile? What's the best way?
Either or, I don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Well, that was really interesting. Lots to think about there. And really good tips there, especially coming out of everyone being in lockdown situation, and we may have not eaten or consumed as healthily as usual, and we may start to feel some side effects of that with how we're feeling, with our moods, with our hormonal balance. So not to give anybody any shame or to rap anybody on their knuckles. That's just life. We go through intense periods of stress, and whether you felt stressed in COVID or not, everyone was placed in a very different situation than they've ever been in their lives. And so there's no shame in if you've overeaten or overconsumed. So but it is in your power to take some small steps day by day, mouthful by mouthful, cup of something by cup of something, to restore that balance back in your body and feel better on the other side. So just to be a bit more mindful about what we eat and drink. So you've given us some fabulous tips there, and I will write it all down in the blog below the video as well, because I think there's just a lot of useful information there, Georgina. I really appreciate that.